Imagine a time, if you will, when ferns, yes, ferns, sparked this huge national frenzy.
It sounds a bit strange now, doesn't it? But it wasn't just a fleeting interest.
No, not at all. It was a genuine obsession. People were scrambling around the countryside, collecting them, decorating their home.
It's called Pteridomania, which, basically means fern madness
Uh-huh.
or the fern craze.
Right, and that term itself, Pteridomania, it popped up around 1855, coined by Charles Kingsley, I think.
That's the one, in his book Glaucus, or The Wonders of the Shore. And what's really striking is how deep this went.
Yeah, looking at the sources for this deep dive articles, historical accounts, it was a major cultural thing in Victorian Britain.
Absolutely. So our mission today really is to get under the skin of Pteridomania.
Yeah.
What actually started this fern madness?
How did it show up in everyday life? And importantly, did it leave any kind of lasting mark?
Exactly. Where do we start? The timing.
Okay, let's unpack the timeline. The peak seems to be, what, 1850s through the 1890s?
That's generally the accepted period, yeah. But the first signs of interest were
Yeah.
definitely earlier, back in the late 1830s.
Okay, so the 1830s, what was happening then? What was going on in Victorian society that might have, paved the way for this?
Well, it ties into a bigger trend. The
Mhm.
1830s saw a real boom in natural history study. You had more people, not just professionals, but amateurs too, really getting out into the British countryside, exploring.
Observing plants, presumably.
Exactly. And crucially, you also had publications starting up, like The Phytologist. That first came out in 1844.
Ah, so like a journal for sharing discoveries.
Precisely. It gave people a platform, professionals, amateurs, everyone to publish what they found. It helped build this collective knowledge base.
And ferns were apparently a hot topic within that. Why them specifically? Why were they seen as this fruitful group?
Well, compared to, say, flowering plants, ferns just hadn't been studied as much. They were a bit neglected, scientifically speaking.
So more opportunity for discovery.
Definitely. For anyone curious, it felt like you could actually make a real contribution, find something new. And another key factor was access.
Access. How so?
Think about where ferns thrive. The wilder, wetter parts of Britain, right? The west, the north.
Okay.
Well, these areas were becoming much easier to get to. Better roads, and especially the railways spreading out.
Ah, I see. So easier travel meant more people reaching these fern-rich areas.
Exactly. And finding a greater diversity of species than perhaps they'd seen before.
Okay, but still, why ferns? What was the specific appeal? It wasn't like every plant became a national obsession.
That's a really good question. What made ferns so special? Charles Kingsley, the guy who coined the term, he had an interesting take.
Oh, yeah. What did he?
He observed how much it seemed to engage women. He felt it gave them something stimulating, intellectually rewarding, maybe.
Compared to other typical pastimes.
Yeah, compared to things like, reading novels, gossip, crochet, that sort of thing. He saw it as a more active, engaging pursuit.
So respectable, but also mentally stimulating. But the sources suggest it wasn't just for women, right? It had a kind of dual nature.
Absolutely. For some, it was definitely a fashionable trend, a hobby to be seen doing. But for others, it was a serious scientific interest, real botanical passion.
A mix of fashion and science.
And there's another layer too. Peter D.A. Boyd, a naturalist, pointed out something fascinating about social class.
Oh, what was that?
He argued that fern collecting kind of bridged the gap between classes because you could find ferns in the wild.
Anyone could potentially find them.
Right. Boyd's point was that even the farm laborer or miner could have a collection. So it created this shared interest across different social levels.
That's really interesting. A shared hobby cutting across those rigid Victorian divides, maybe fulfilling some kind of need for connection.
Perhaps. It's a compelling thought.
Okay, so if this became such a big deal, there must have been like a whole industry around it. Tools, buying and selling.
Oh, completely. The commercial side really took off. You had a thriving market selling all sorts of fern-related merchandise.
Like what?
Well, identification books were huge. Things like the ferns of Great Britain and Ireland. Absolutely essential if you were a serious collector.
Makes sense. And how did people get the ferns themselves?
Two main ways, really. You could buy them from dealers, who often specialized in ferns, or you could go out and collect them yourself from, their natural habitats.
So hunting for them in the wild.
Yes, and people went on dedicated collecting trips, sometimes quite far afield.
And once you had them, what then? Did you just stick them in a pot?
Oh no, it was much more elaborate than that. Preserving and displaying them was a big part of it.
How so?
People would press the fronds really carefully and mount them in albums. These albums became quite treasured possessions.
Like botanical art pieces.
Sort of, yeah. And live plants were hugely popular too. People grew them in their gardens, but also indoors. Nurseries started supplying loads of different types, native ones, but also exotic species from places like the Americas.
Ah, the exotic appeal. And wasn't there some invention that really helped with growing them indoors? Something about the London air?
You're thinking of the Wardian case. Spot on. Invented way back around 1829 by Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward.
Right. Tell us about that.
Well, it was basically a sealed glass container, like an early terrarium. Ward originally designed it to protect his plants, including ferns, from London's smoggy, polluted air.
Which must have been terrible for delicate plants.
Awful. But the Wardian case did more than just protect them. It created this stable, humid microclimate inside.
Perfect for ferns.
Exactly. And it also revolutionized transporting plants over long distances.
Yeah.
But aesthetically, they just took off.
Became fashionable.
Hugely. They became these really stylish items for drawing rooms, not just in Britain, but across Western Europe, the U.S. too. It fueled the fern craze, definitely, but also helped kickstart the later obsession with orchids.
Wow, these little glass boxes had a big impact. So people had Wardian cases indoors. What about outdoors or on a larger scale?
Well, if you had the means, you might build a dedicated fern house, a type of greenhouse just for ferns.
A whole house for them.
Yes. And outdoor ferneries became quite fashionable garden features too, often in shady, damp corners. Rockeries designed specifically for ferns.
They really went all in. And I remember reading about a fascination with weird variations, not just the standard species.
Oh, absolutely. There was an intense interest in what they called monstrosities. These were unusual variants found in the wild ferns with crested tips or extra frilly bits or strangely divided fronds.
Deviations from the norm.
Exactly. Highly prized for being different for their novelty, horticulturalists ended up cultivating literally hundreds of name varieties from just a few common wild species.
Like which ones?
Things like the soft shield fern, Polycitrum sativum, Belady fern, Aetherium fulixemina, and the heart's tongue fern, Asplenium scolopendrium. The sheer number of cultivated forms derived from these is pretty amazing.
That level of focus is incredible. Okay, so beyond collecting and growing, didn't ferns also seep into design and decoration?
They absolutely did. Fern motifs were everywhere in Victorian design, massively popular.
Really? How so?
Well, think about the shape of a fern frond. It's quite flat, intricate, perfect for decorating surfaces.
Ah, okay. Easy to copy or use.
Right. They were featured prominently at the Great Exhibition follow-up, the 1862 International Exhibition. People glued actual fronds into albums or onto objects. They used them as stencils for spatterwork.
Spatterwork? What's that?
It's a technique where you lay the frond down and then spatter ink or paint around it, leaving a silhouette. Nature printing, where you ink the actual frond and press it, was also popular.
Clever. So we'd see these motifs on everyday objects?
Definitely. Pottery's a big one. Major names like Wedgwood, Minton, Royal Worcester, George Jones, they all produced pottery with fern patterns. Tableware, decorative tiles, elaborate majolica pieces.
Any standout examples?
There's a pretty impressive memorial by Wedgwood, actually, for Sir William Jackson Hooker, the botanist. It's in Kew Church from 1867.
Made of Wedgwood pottery.
Yes, jasper panels with these beautiful, delicate sprigs of exotic ferns applied to them. There's a copy in the V&A Museum, too, if you want to see it.
Wow. A fern memorial. And it wasn't always super realistic depictions, was it?
No, even stylized versions were common. On engraved glass, metalwork. You could still tell it was meant to be ferny, even if it wasn't botanically perfect.
Instantly recognizable.
And here's one you'll definitely know. Think about a custard cream biscuit.
The biscuit! No way!
Yes. That pattern pressed into the biscuit. It's a fern motif. And it's been there pretty much consistently since the Victorian era, no matter who makes them.
That's amazing. A little edible piece of Pteridomania.
Exactly. And it wasn't just true ferns either. Things called fern allies, like club mosses, like Lycopodiopsida, and spike mosses, Selaginella, also got collected and used in designs.
Okay, so this fern fever was pretty widespread and, well, seemingly quite positive in many ways, science, art, hobbies. But was there a downside?
Ah, yes. There was definitely a darker side, particularly the environmental impact.
The collective.
The sheer zeal of the collectors.
Yeah.
It led to really serious declines in some of the rarer native fern species.
Oh, dear. Like which ones?
Well, the oblong woodgia, Woodgia elvensis, up in Scotland, in Moffat Hills, it was hit really hard. Places that used to have lots now just have tiny populations.
That's sad.
Very.
Then?
And the alpine Woodgia alpina, faced similar problems. It even led to tragedy.
Tragedy. How?
There was a botanical guide, William Williams. He actually died in 1861 while collecting alpine Woodgia on a cliff face in Wales.
Good grief. Just for a fern.
It shows the risks people took. And there's another story about John Sadler, who later became a curator at the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. He apparently nearly died collecting a fern from a dangerous spot, too.
Wow. The intensity is hard to grasp. Did people at the time realize this was happening, that they were damaging populations?
Some did. Nona Belair's, who wrote a guidebook called Hardy Ferns in 1865, she actually called for fern laws.
Laws to protect them back then?
Yes, specifically to stop the overcollection. So there was some awareness. Another example is the Killarney fern, Vandenboschia speciosa.
What happened with that one?
It was thought to have been completely wiped out in Scotland by collectors, driven to local extinction.
Oh, no.
But interestingly, it was rediscovered much later on the Isle of Skye. Not as the familiar leafy fern, but in its other life stage, the gambophyte, which looks more like a mossy film and was overlooked.
A lucky escape, then.
A very lucky escape. And there was Dickey's bladder fern, Cystopteris dickeyiana. That was found in Kincardineshire and almost immediately stripped from its location by 1860. Thankfully, it seems to have recovered since.
It's quite sobering, isn't it? This passion for nature actually harming nature.
It's a real paradox,
Mm.
driven by appreciation, but leading to destruction in some cases.
Now, we usually think of Pteridomania as this very, very British thing, don't we? An eccentricity of the Victorians over here.
That's the common perception, yes. It's often framed as primarily a British phenomenon.
But did it stay just within Britain, or did the fern fever travel?
Well, that's debated a bit. Historical views differ. John D. Scott, a botanist, he argued that it mostly passed America by.
Really? Why did he think that?
His reasoning was partly that America didn't have as many of those weird, freaky, abnormal fern forms that the Brits got so excited about.
Ah, the monstrosities.
Right. And he also suggested American botanists were maybe more focused on the complexities of fern science, the taxonomy, rather than just collecting variations.
Okay, so one view is not so much in America, but you said it's debated.
Yes, because other historians, like Sarah Whittingham, argue quite strongly that there's actually much proof that it reached American shores.
What kind of proof?
Well, for a start, the American Fern Society was founded in 1893, and it's still going strong today with members all over the world. That suggests a pretty solid level of interest back then.
It's a fair point. Any other evidence?
There's the Dorrance H. Hamilton Fernery. It's at the Morris Arboretum in Pennsylvania. It's apparently the only freestanding Victorian-era fernery left in North America. A physical legacy.
Okay, so maybe not the same mania as Britain, but definitely a significant interest there too. What about elsewhere? Any other examples?
The sources mention Australia, specifically Queensland. And there, the impact sounds quite negative again.
How so?
It seems the demand for ferns as decoration led to people stripping native epiphytic ferns, things like staghorns and bird's nest ferns, straight from the wild.
Epiphytic. Those are the ones that grow on trees.
That's right. They weren't just collected for private homes. They were apparently used to decorate public buildings, even train stations. And this practice apparently continued quite late, well into the 20th century.
Gosh, so this British craze had ripples, and sometimes damaging ones, far beyond its shores.
It certainly seems so. It wasn't just confined to the UK.
Okay, so bringing this all together then, this deep dive into Pteridomania, what are the main takeaways?
I think it shows this remarkable intersection of different forces in Victorian society. You had scientific curiosity booming,
Right, the desire to discover and classify.
mixed with changing fashions and decoration, and these interesting social aspects, like class bridging and new pastimes for women.
A complex mix.
Definitely. And it clearly led to positives, like a huge increase in botanical knowledge and appreciation for a whole group of plants. But, and it's a big but, it also had this real environmental cost through over-collecting.
A cautionary tale, perhaps.
In a way, yes. It reminds us that even passions driven by appreciation for nature can have unintended negative consequences if they aren't managed carefully.
That's a really powerful point. It makes you think, doesn't it? Looking at our own time, with our own collecting habits, our online trends, our relationship with the environment.
Mm-hmm.
What manias do we have today that future generations might look back on with that same mix of fascination and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of concern?
That is definitely something to ponder. What are our modern-day pteridomanias?